Carol Beaumont.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Mr Chair, I rise to speak on the Taxation Annual Rates, Trans-Tasman Savings, Portability, Kiwisaver and Remedial Matters Bill. As others have said, we are supporting this bill and there are a number of very sensible changes being proposed here. I would note much of this is work started under the previous Labor government and we've also got a Labor member's SOP in the name of Stuart Nash I intend to come back to and speak about. But can I say that the issue of improving Trans-Tasman portability of retirement savings is a very important one given the movement of people between our two countries and is quite a significant amount of money that's being potentially covered here, up to $16 billion. New Zealand dollars, that is. So we think that that's a positive thing and potentially will assist, obviously, individuals so that they're not being stung by multiple fees for the administration of their retirement savings account and obviously assist in something that both countries value, which is ensuring that people can save for their retirement and have an adequate standard of living in their retirement. So that's a very positive part of this. It is interesting to note the question of the relationship between Australia and New Zealand and movement between the two countries, one that has been raised certainly when Labor was in government, and we have, of course, have been raising quite strongly of recent times, given the increasing gap in wages between Australia and New Zealand. And for the record, I would say, and I know others have tried to assert at various times, particularly when Labor was in government, that the reason that New Zealand has moved to Australia is for tax differences. Well, I mean, that's obviously rubbish. The main reason is the differential in wages, which is around 30%, but growing, as we know, something very worrying for us. And one of the things that I would note is that the government has got no plan to address this particular problem. Their economic development strategies do not focus on the workplace, do not focus on lifting workers' skills, and if we want to transform our economy to the sort of high-wage, high-skill, highly productive workplaces that we need to be successful internationally, then we really do need to focus on lifting wages, lifting skills and looking at how we organise our workplaces and how we invest in our workplaces. But let me go back to the matter at hand. I would say that some of the SOPs, again, we're supporting. It is interesting to note the fairly extensive provisions that have been needed to be made, transitional provisions to get the GST increase through in a way that doesn't have some very strange anomalies and unintended consequences. And you know, you can only say that that's probably as a consequence of the way that the government forced through GST increases under urgency in Budget 2010 without really considering some of the compliance costs and unforeseen consequences. And I think that, you know, is a real shame. And I note that accounting firm Ernst & Young stated last week, quote, as we face the harsh reality of the 1st of October GST increase to 15%, many are realising this is not a modest increase and the issues are actually more complex than anyone first imagined. So, you know, one of the transitional arrangements is around the fact that this has been forced through without considering all the consequences and now having to be tidied up in this bill. Now, of course, very importantly for this side of the House is that GST increases will have a hugely detrimental effect on New Zealand families and businesses. And my colleagues here and myself are getting every day people talking to us about their concern about the additional costs that they are going to face with GST rising, the implications of that for inflation, and their recognition that the so-called compensation that they've had for this is absolutely ludicrous. People do not buy what those opposite are saying, that they have been taken account of by their paltry, for most New Zealand, paltry tax cuts or for beneficiaries, small increases that have been made, because people are not silly and they are really struggling already. So they see that that's a real issue, and that is why I really want to speak in favour of the SOP being put up by my colleague Stuart Nash, which is exempting council rates over the transition period. This is a very sensible provision, and I urge those opposite to consider this. Basically, it will exempt this year's local government rates from the increase on GST
Order.
to 15%.
Order.
Sorry? Sorry, Mr Chair.
If you want another call, you must ask for
Sorry,
the
Mr Chair.
Carol Beaumont.
Thank you. It will exempt this year's local government rates from the increase on GST to 15%. And as I've noted, there's a number of transitional provisions in this bill that look at 5-year finance leases and lay-by sales and insurance contracts from the increased GST rate. And a lot of the underlying reason for that is a similar one to the reason that Stuart Nash has put up this SOP on exempting council rates. So let's look at why we need to do this. Well, as I've already mentioned, the costs that are being faced by New Zealanders at the moment are really enormous, and people are struggling out there. The majority of wage and salary earners are seeing their wages and salaries lift by a massive 0%. That's right, most people are not getting an increase in their income. Many people have lost hours of work, including overtime payments. And I know that if people across the House are honest, unless they are wandering around with their eyes closed and not talking to people, they know that to be a fact. So here's a small thing that you can do to assist, help relieve that pressure that families are facing. And Mr Nash referred to budget services, and I also want to put on record my acknowledgement of those people. Those people do a fantastic job against the odds in trying to help struggling New Zealand families. And recently I was at a meeting hosted by the Mangere Budgeting Services, and it was a packed meeting with people from across Auckland. And some of the things that were raised at that meeting I think is worthy of the House's interest. Of course, they had noted what had just happened, which was 150 jobs in the New World and Mount Roskill and 2,700 people trying to get those jobs, and there is a really huge issue with unemployment. They also talked about the fact that the average level of debt of those people approaching budgeting services is on the increase. They talked about the fact that more and more they are seeing people coming in with debt related to loan shark loans with the rates of interest over 100%. And of course we know that over the other side of the House people failed to take an opportunity to address that particular issue, and I acknowledge the Honourable Peter Dunn, because he in fact didn't take that position. He supported that bill, which would have made a difference. The budgeting services people also told us about how when people are looking for housing, and as we know it's a very tight housing market in Auckland at the moment, that they are being pushed more and more into the private sector. And they gave examples, many of the people there, of people paying upwards of 65 to 70% of their income to a private landlord. Now that doesn't leave much for food, and that was the thing that came through from all of the budgeting service people, that what's being really squeezed, the thing that households can control, and the question is whether we think that this is appropriate, is the food that they put on the table for them and their children. And people are trying to live on ridiculous amounts of money, and they are not eating properly. They are really struggling. There's been a massive increase in food grants. So I thought it was worthy to note some of those concerns raised by budgeting services in a very recent meeting I had. And so going back to the SOP, this would help. It would help those people paying their rates in having the situation of not having to pay the higher rate of GST for their rates for this year, the rate bill from the 1st of July 2010. So again, I urge those opposite to support that change. Now, can I just also take the opportunity to talk about Kiwisaver and acknowledge that there is an SOP, I understand now, in the name of Mr Garrett. I'm assuming that's replacing Mr Boscawen, our new Consumer Affairs Minister, and we support that. We think it's logical. I would note, of course, that it is extremely difficult for wage and salary earners to save at the moment for the very reasons I've outlined, in that it is very difficult to make ends meet, facing higher costs across the board really, and so this is a problem. But nonetheless, it is a good move. And having workers' superannuation schemes is of course what has given Australia a real advantage over this country. The massive amount of capital that has been built up in Australia